Hi, as the first block of Module 1, Fundamentals of Electricity Market, we're going to take a historical perspective. In terms of historical perspective, we have to define the event we care about. The event is the deregulation of the electric power sector, and deregulation means that you're going to move from a regulated system to a deregulated system. By regulated system, we mean that prices are all determined by regulatory governmental bodies. That can be the energy prices, but also the transmission and distribution prices, that is, these prices that are related to the cost of bringing the electricity from the producers to the consumers, so paying for the infrastructures and their operation. In this regulated system, we talk about vertically integrated structure, which is something we will discuss in another block of this module. Eventually, in a regulated system, one cannot choose a supplier for electric energy, and this is something that was the case until quite recently in many European countries, for instance. The process of deregulation means moving from this regulated system to a deregulated system. In the deregulated system, we believe that the free market is going to help derive right prices, and this is this invisible hand of the market that will permit to determine the price for energy, which is the most important concept in deregulated energy markets. And possibly there could be a free market so as to determine the price for transmission and distribution usage. In this deregulated system, we break the vertically integrated structure and we go to a horizontal restructuring of the electric power sector. Eventually, for the final consumer, this means that there is competition among a set of suppliers, and eventually you can choose where you get your electricity from. That means who you're going to buy your electricity from. Looking really through history, we could say that this story started in the 80s, in the early 80s. We often refer to these men, the Chicago Boys, who were a group of Chilean students who were sent to the US thanks to a Fulbright program. They ended up in Chicago, learning from some of the greatest economists of the time who were focusing on the idea of liberalization, not just for the electric power sector, but still this bunch of Chilean people, students in the US, came back home afterwards and brought some of these liberal ideas and pushed for the first ideas for liberalization of the electric power sector. This means that actually Chile was one of the first countries, if not the first country, to bring this concept of electricity market into play. Then closer to us, it's in the UK, under the leadership of Margaret Thatcher, that the process of liberalization or deregulation of the electric power sector started in the 90s. In view of the influence of the UK on the other Commonwealth member countries, this has spread quite rapidly, and New Zealand and Australia actually followed on this idea of deregulation soon afterwards. Closer to us, and just after the case of the UK, Scandinavia started deregulating in '91. And we will discuss that quite a lot more in a few slides since we want to zoom on the case of Scandinavia. A bit further from us, California, which you may have heard of. California was a great state to think of deregulation. Still today, it's a state that tried to be at the forefront in terms of energy transition, moving towards renewables, maybe integrating storage. In '96 already, California worked on deregulating the electric power sector in a very similar way to the UK and other countries. But because of the implementation, possibly, and the behavior of the participants in the market, this actually led to the famous California electricity crisis in 2000-2001, which is a complex process with a lot of events that followed one after the other. But to sum up, or in short, there was a shortage of electricity supply in the market at the time, which is actually seen as an artificial shortage due to the behavior of some participants. So the price rise in the wholesale electricity market, but at the same time, the prices were capped in the retail market. So it created some tension for people who were in between. Eventually, there were problems with electricity supply, shortages, blackouts, state of emergency, bankruptcies, and possibly you've heard that there was an investigation of the role of Enron in this crisis, because it is thought that possibly they were artificially controlling this shortage in the electricity market. Closer to us, history of the Nord Pool. I told you the story of the Nord Pool started in 91, and Norway was actually the country that paved the way for deregulation in Scandinavia, as Norway in 91 decided that the electricity market should be deregulated and we should go towards this free electricity market in Scandinavia. They convinced Sweden to team up in 96, and then they created the Nord Pool. The Nord Pool is this electricity market that we have today in Scandinavia, and that has spread quite a lot afterwards actually. It started with the inclusion of Finland in 98, Western Denmark in 98 too, and in the year 2000, Eastern Denmark joined too. I hope you remember I mentioned in a previous block that Denmark was separated into two parts, Western and Eastern Denmark, and this explains why the two parts of Denmark didn't join the market at the same time. In 2002, pushing the process of deregulation, the Nord Pool and its spot market especially was established as a new separate entity so that we fully separate the operation of the power system and the market for financial contracts between supply and demand. It went a bit further in 2008 when Nasdaq acquired Nord Pool. You must have heard of Nasdaq. Nasdaq is a premier provider of electronic trading platform for many commodities throughout the world. You have this Nasdaq big screen on Times Square in New York that everybody must have heard of. So Nord Pool is now part of Nasdaq, and it's been more than 10 years now. In the process of further coupling the Nord Pool with other electricity markets in Europe, it started in 2009 with the coupling of Scandinavia and Germany, and you will hear later in this course that the process has now spread through the whole Europe, and it is the plan that we are all coupled in the future. In 2009, the concept of negative prices was accepted in the electricity market. Before that, it was expected that everybody would offer in terms of buying or selling at positive prices, but because of the law and supply and demand, it was thought we should allow for negative prices in case supply is higher than demand. The spreading continued in 2013 with all the Baltic countries being integrated over the previous 3 years. And if you want to have a complete view of the history of the Nord Pool, there's many more points to be covered. I just made a selection here. You are most welcome to visit the website of Nasdaq, where Nasdaq has a specific page for the Nord Pool where you can see the history, the rules of the market, how they evolved, etc. Today, the game is changing again. We have discussed this concept of electricity market and deregulation. This process still assumes that the power system is operated in a certain way and that the hierarchy of the players is also in a certain way. So we have this traditional view, even though we're not going to have a vertically integrated electric power sector, we still have a view that there's going to be a set of producers. We put them at the top here to have this feeling of hierarchy. There's going to be transmission, distribution in between, and then we're going to have these consumers at the bottom. Consumers possibly being large consumers like industry and small consumers, so residential. We call this model, in terms of electricity market, a supplier-centric model, since we believe these are the central actors and the energy they produce is just going to spread out to the consumers. However, today, this model is changing very rapidly and substantially. We're moving towards this hierarchical view and supplier-centric view to a fully decentralized view of electricity market and the underlying power system and its operation. Why? Because we have prosumers in the picture. We have more decentralized generation in general. We're going to have electric cars. You've heard of storage being residential or grid-scale storage. When we have this new organization of the power system, this is going to imply changes also of the electricity market. And we are hearing a lot today about how these changes may be. There might be new ways to think of demand response in the market. There might be new ways to think about the role of consumers in the electricity market. And possibly we could go for a bottom-up organic view of how these people may trade, and that would translate to what we call a consumer-centric electricity market. Thank you very much. I would propose you to use the self-assessment quiz to check your understanding of this block. Thank you.